In this episode of the Documentary Review Podcast, Jonathan and I live our lives on the edge as we review the 2008 documentary, Man on Wire. Welcome to the podcast, everyone. I am PT.
And I'm Jonathan. Glad to see you this week.
Glad to see you. Okay, good. Google Hangouts always, if you click the wrong thing, it, leaves the one person's picture up the entire time. I didn't want that to happen, but I fixed it now, so it's all good.
Good deal.
All right, so Man on Wire. I'm just gonna dive right into it. Jonathan, we talked about how last week 100% positive rating on the on Rotten Tomatoes from the critics out of 160 some or 180. I think it was 185 critics give this a positive rating. So what are you gonna come down with the critics, or are you gonna side against them on Man on Wire?
You know, I was a little on the wire about it, but I did come down on the positive side. I did like it, but I wasn't I wasn't blown away by this documentary by any means. And in fact, there were a couple of things that I'll bring up later as we talk that I thought were a little bit questionable, or a little bit, I wasn't a huge fan of it from a documentary film standpoint. But
Okay.
anyway, but overall, a positive. I'm at least 51% in favor of this movie.
Sweet. All right. Good. Whew. We didn't ruin the average. Yeah, I like it a lot too. And it's ironic that we're doing this. That last week we did Exit Through the Gift Shop, and we're doing this because I remember when I originally watched both these two movies, I watched them both one day after each other, just on happenstance, and I was like, documentaries are the greatest thing ever. I should only watch documentaries, because I definitely loved both of them. So I love this movie. Sounds like possibly more than you did, but we'll get into that. So give us your little introductory synopsis, if you don't mind.
Sure, you bet. Man on Wire is a film about a essentially 1974 stunt to span a wire between the World Trade Towers in New York, just prior to their true completion, by a Frenchman who is a very artistic and idealistic individual, and it's his ragtag group of friends that put in a fairly large effort to see if they can accomplish this feat. And that is Man on Wire.
Thanks, everybody. See you next week. No, good synopsis. All right, let me ask you this before we get into the actual documentary. How do you feel about the this is I think a question that could span throughout the whole genre of documentaries. How do you feel about the approach of recreations? Because there are quite a few recreations in this.
There were, and my opinion is I don't like them, which is why I'm on the 51% side of a positive rating. Not that it's just 51%. It was a good documentary, but I did not like the recreation aspect of it. There's something I appreciate about the true nature of just a flat-out documentary of taking a subject, whatever it is, and just focusing on it and following that. And I mean, granted, in this case, the subject was 40 years ago. So I get it. I get where the recreations came in on it, but I still don't like it, and I would rather have had just flat out shots of the people telling the stories, or maybe even they had a lot of photographic. They didn't have that much video footage, but they had tons of photographic elements from the time they did it and things like that. And I think it could have been put together a little bit different. I would have liked it a little bit better without the recreations. How about you? What's your
Yeah, I'm with you on that. That was my one complaint about the movie was the recreations. I always feel, and we were talking before this, that I just watched the Jinx on HBO, the true crime kind of series, and that's they do that same thing in there, and it totally bugged me. I'm like, gosh, I feel like whenever they do that, it lowers the production value or something a little bit.
It lessens it. Yeah, you're right.
And I mean, I don't think you can excuse it for being 40 years ago, because I mean, Ken Burns does documentaries on the Civil War in which he, just
right.
shows pictures and shows people talking, and it's awesome. So so I did not like that choice either. I think it's always kind of hokey. I guess it's probably too much watching Unsolved Mysteries or whatever when we were kids that was all those really crappy dramatizations and recreations.
Right.
I don't like that too much. All right, so where should we start with this thing?
I guess like all good things, let's start in the beginning. What was your take on the intro of Man on Wire? Because you're always about,
Yeah. So like the very very beginning was like, I think it was Philippe talking about like waking up from a dream and like realizing that he like forgot to close the crate. Basically, like what I liked about the way it started was that it kind of starts like a heist film. Like right away you get into the drama of the kind of the break it into the World Trade Center. So it kind of starts that right away. This now, when I said I only had one complaint, I might have two complaints about that because I actually did think it was like slightly almost confusing the way that it hopped around in time a lot, and and not to say I don't think confusing is quite the right word because like I always knew where I was, but like there's a few times like when he takes a couple of his exploratory trips to like America to like stake out the World Trade Center. When I was like not sure, I was like, is this like his first trip, his second trip? There's like some of the timeline got a little fuzzy for me just because of the way that it hopped around in time a little bit. So that they kind of have this like thing that runs throughout where they keep cutting back to like the heist in progress, so to speak, like them kind of breaking into the World Trade Center, and then they go back and show little pieces of the story that led up to that, which I think was a cool technique and worked overall. But a couple times it got a little fuzzy for me.
Yeah, I hear you, but I thought about that a lot because the first time I watched, I was like, do we really need to do this? Where like, essentially, whatever like you said, like there's the guts of the entirety of the documentary is the the wire walk between the World Trade Centers, and I was like, oh, why don't they just kind of show like the history of Philippe and then get him to that, and then I really started thinking about it. I was like, that's almost the way they had to put this together, because otherwise it would have been, an hour and 15 minutes of build and then 15 minutes of story, and I don't think it would have worked very well that way. So yeah, it was a little odd, and it got a little choppy, like you said, especially when you start to get closer to the end, where you're like, wait, is this part of the actual story, or
right.
like the thread they're telling? Because they always cut to everyone's actual like, and again the little leading up to the World Trade Center Tower walk. But without that, it would have been like I said, like an hour and 15 minutes of build up to 15 minutes of the punchline. So I think that they made a good decision chopping it all up like that.
Yeah, no, yeah, I liked the approach of showing the heist, little pieces of the heist. I thought that was cool.
Yeah, it was
for sure. So, what do you think of Philippe as a kind of our central character and our narrator and all that stuff? What's your feeling on Philippe?
Well, I like Philippe. I think our last week podcast was about Exit Through the Gift Shop, and I think there are a lot of ties between like Philippe and a Banksy, where the guy is obviously like a true artist, where he sees the world in a whimsical and almost magical point of view. Even like I mentioned that, I made notes on that I really like the way that they even like the way they spoke about the world around them and the way they saw the world around them. It was very, very cool and whimsical. And then like the fact that this guy dedicated years and obviously a fairly large sum of money to be able to walk, between two buildings on a really tight wire. Then that's pointless on any, on almost any like measurable level. There's no point to that. But it was still really an amazing and very cool moment, and it it's the same reason why do you climb a mountain, why do you do this wire walk, why do you spend 10 years painting the sides of buildings for people to see for 2 weeks before it gets destroyed. So there was that element to the film, and that's what I really liked about Philippe. He was very even 40 years later, he's still a whimsical dude that you can tell, like just like watching him, I'm like, I'd love to hang out with that guy. He seemed very interesting. He has a love of life for sure. He was a cool cool guy.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, and I don't know like how much of this was scripted or how much of it, was like just just out the cuff, but it was cool to see him. Like sometimes he just gets so excited about telling the story, just like be hopping out of his chair and like running around the little interview room and like seemed like a guy who just, for one thing, couldn't sit still, but also had a lot of passion and energy for everything he did. One thing like that I was a little surprised about, and when I went back and watched it again, I was like kind of looking for this because I didn't remember it from the first time I watched it years ago, and but it's not really in there, which is like they don't talk too much about like what his background is. Like, I mean, they say like he's a self-taught wire walker, but like is it seriously? Is that his only background? Is that he's like setting it up in his backyard? I mean, what does he have like performance experience? I guess they show him a couple times like in the streets of Paris and stuff like that before he starts doing his stunts. But like, and then also he clearly has some like illusion kind of experience. Like they talk about how he steals one of the cops' watches, and like a couple times they show him just making stuff, doing little vanishes on little sticks and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm curious about his background, and we don't get a ton of that. But not that that's bad necessarily, but I'm curious about him.
Yeah, that's a good point. The other thing that I was curious about was not just his background in training, but what is his background? Obviously, like, there's no. I mean, maybe at the end, maybe after he walked the World Trade Centers, which was kind of like the pinnacle movement or pinnacle moment of his other like stunts, as you said, that he did. But that stuff, I would assume, cost a ton of money. I mean, he was flying back and forth from France to America and putting together a team and getting the equipment and all that stuff. I was like, where did, maybe he came from a very wealthy family. Maybe he just like made enough money juggling on the streets that he was able to pull this all off. But I would like to have known that. Where did he get the funding and the resources to make this happen? It was more than just like, I want to do it and like put together a ragtag team and do it. I'm sure it cost a somewhat substantial amount of money.
All right. It seems like we always have that complaint about documentaries.
We do. We always have it.
Yeah. I guess we're just like
just capitalist pigs.
Yeah, capitalist
That's
pigs.
it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So the origin of Philippe's whole dream, the way it's presented, is he's in the dentist's office. Which, by the way, my dad always reminds me. Anytime the dentist comes up, he's like, what the greatest technological like advancement of my lifetime is, mine being his lifetime, is dentistry. He's like, man, you don't know how terrible going to the dentist was when I was a kid or whatever, like the complete torture it was, and like the amazing stuff they do now. So anyway, shout out to the dentist technology of the modern day.
All right, rock
on. So anyway, like Philippe is going to the dentist back in the day when my dad was a kid, when it was horrible apparently, and he's got a toothache, and he sees an article about the World Trade Centers being built, and he's like, hey, I want to walk between those two trade centers. And then he dedicates the next however many years to it.
Yeah, how long was that? Because they never say how old he was when he did it, and they didn't say. I mean, they said he was 17 in that dentist's office. And then you don't know how old he was when he actually pulled it off, and you don't know what year it was when he was 17. So
yeah, I think I read somewhere that he was 24 when he did it.
Okay. All right, so dedicated 7 years to pulling it off.
Yeah. So good job, Philippe. And he doesn't start there. He goes and walks a few other big places throughout the world. They show one that's in Sydney, Australia, one that's Notre Dame. He walks and
yeah.
The cool part about it is, like, one of the most interesting things about it to me is his friends that he gets to go along with him and help him set this stuff up. Because I don't know, it's just interesting that I guess he's just a guy who inspires that kind of things with his passion, but it seems like it'd be a tough order to get a bunch of friends to come help you do that.
Really, I can absolutely see it, because so like his first one is Notre Dame, it's just his fact check, and then he goes to Sydney in '73, which is only a year prior to the World Trade Centers. But early 20s, I could see myself follow, especially if somebody was even remotely passionate about it and it sounded exciting, I would have done it. I would have helped to do it or whatever, been part of it. And I'm sure it was that one, the fact that he did Notre Dame and like he was like pulled that off. Because even that, I mean, they just they just glance over those two, the two prior that he did prior to the World Trade Center, just like, oh yeah, and then we did Notre Dame, we just did a tightrope walk in between it, and they talk about it a little bit, and they're like, oh yeah, and then we did one on the whatever the bridge in Sydney, in the harbor in Sydney, and it stopped traffic and stuff like that. But those are two really big things and really successful. So I could see it being really hard to get that first one and get that core group of people that are like, yeah, let's do it. Let's break into Notre Dame and string of this wire and have you walk it. But after that, I could see where you're like in, because one, I'm sure it's a rush. I'm sure it was an amazing thing, and they made headlines, and it was a cool thing, and they were part of it. So I could see him taking each step beyond that.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I wasn't sure when to bring this up, but I think I can't go any further because I think there's so many like touch points throughout the rest of the movie without bringing up what I think is like the most brilliant thing about this movie, and I think what make all the critics like it so much is the fact that the movie is, you can basically look at it as being essentially about 9/11, but they never once mention 9/11 in the whole thing. Like, you can look at the whole thing as being like a shadow version, like a happier version of 9/11. You've got these guys from another country planning how they're going to do this big thing at the World Trade Center. They come, they sneak in, like they're carrying their gear, and all this stuff is like the same kind of stuff that we would associate with like a terrorist attack. But unlike 9/11, which of course was designed to create terror and everything, these guys are doing it to create wonder and taking like the similar kind of steps, but doing it all for a positive and happy result. So I think that's like the most amazing and really cool thing about this, is that that's always there in the background, and like obviously every time we see the World Trade Centers we probably think of that, but they never once mention it. And I thought that was a brilliant approach.
Yeah, that is actually really cool. I mean, I certainly I guess I didn't give enough credit for that. I mean, obviously, like you said, you can't watch it without drawing the parallels. And you can't. The very first scenes after that little like Philip Dream sequence thing that he talks about, but right after that, they show literally starting from the footprint them building the World Trade Centers, and obviously you can't think about that without thinking about 9/11, and also like to see their construction, which in my lifetime, when the World Trade Centers was just something that existed. I didn't, as a kid and even as a young adult, I never thought about them, being created. They just were there. They were just part of reality for me. But to see them being built, it's amazing. Like, even just the limited footage they show in this film of erecting the steel structures and the men working on it, and you get a sense of the just insane undertaking that it was to build those. Yeah, I mean, you're right. It was the absolute flip side of seeing them torn down.
Yeah. One thing I read that I did not know about the World Trade Centers at all. I was read a couple articles like that talked about this event. Like PBS did this whole, I think it was like a 10-part series on the history of the World Trade Center. So they also, covered this event in one of those, and I didn't watch it, but I did read a little article about it, and they said in there that basically when the World Trade Centers were being built, like, it was the public opinion about them was pretty negative. Like, they were very much considered that it was going to be like an eyesore on the city, and like public opinion was very much against these buildings being built. And they cited this whole thing with Philippe as being kind of like the start of a turning point of public opinion about the World Trade Centers, like people starting to look at them in a different way. So I don't know how much of that's true. I don't know, but I thought it was pretty interesting. And I wondered why they didn't mention that, but then, I mean, if you have mentioned that stuff, you almost have to.
Yeah, you would have to go there.
Too, and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, unkudos to us because we brought it up.
Yeah, but I mean, I think. Well, I was thinking about, like, should we wait and talk about it at the end? But like, I think all the stuff with their, like, in his like little field, like doing they build like the outline of the tops of the buildings and practice,
right,
and all that stuff. Like, I was definitely thinking about, man, this is definitely like a terrorist camp or whatever, where they're like practicing how they're gonna do this stuff. So that's why,
right,
now instead of saving it till the end. But So let me ask your opinion on that whole scene where they're figuring out one of the big logistical problems is how are they going to get the wire across between the two buildings, and the answer is archery. And as,
Yeah.
as as an archer yourself, how do you feel about the archery portrayal in this documentary?
Yeah, I loved it. I mean, they had a ridiculous little bow or whatever. They could have even used like but still, yeah, I have a special place in my heart for archery. So yeah, I totally liked it. I was like, rock on. Archery solves the issues.
It was funny when they were talking about the different possibilities. Like you could tell they're just a bunch of dumb 20-year-olds. They're like one of their ideas was like learning to play baseball, like tying it around the baseball or something.
Yeah, so they could hit a baseball across. Yeah, I mean, of course, in my mind, like the first thought was, why don't you shoot an arrow? Because,
Right.
that's what I'd do.
Right.
But
So yeah, so they had some funny ideas, but it's pretty cool to watch them come through all that stuff and ultimately, actually do it.
right, yeah, I mean that is a really cool part about it because yeah, I mean like you see a lot of little moments where there's just like a bunch of kids sitting around talking about doing something really impossible, really difficult, and they did put in the hard work. I mean like they kind of knock on Philippe because he's such an idea man, you know what I mean? Where he's just like, oh yes, we must do this because it would be great. There's no, no rationale, like there's no like all those kind of normal steps, and he's just like that drives him. And he says that, and then his one friend is like, well, all right, let's do it, but what's security like? What's the game plan? How are we going to get the ropes up? Where are we going to secure them to? And he starts asking him actual questions about like the logistics of putting this together, and he's like, details, we'll figure that out.
Right.
But they do. So yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and he definitely did. I mean, in spite of all that, he definitely did put the work in. He traveled.
Really
At least,
did.
well, again, I'm fuzzy on that, but he traveled, I think, at least twice to the United States to kind of stake out the World Trade Center and to kind of
What?
figure out the plan and all that stuff.
Yeah, I guess it is a little fuzzy, but I assumed at least 3 times because he goes over once for his like initial whatever scouting it out. That was one thing I kind of put in too on all this too is it seems every time he goes over he easily ends up on the top of that building so he goes over once and he scouts it out, then he does another scouting trip but this time pays a lot more attention, takes notes of the building security, who gets in for shipments in the parking garages, all that stuff, really starts to dive into the security of the towers, and then he also does his fake journalism trip where they call up the managers of the tower and they're like, yeah, we're a French press and we want to go take a look at the top of the towers, and then they actually give him like essentially a guided tour, let him take all the pictures he wants. And so I assumed at least 3 different trips prior to the actual event, which again, it's 3 transatlantic flights that had to cost a lot of money and hotel stays. It wasn't like he was there for an hour. The one trip he's there long enough to step on a nail, injure his foot, and then stay there until it's healed and all better. So he spent, I assume, at least a month in, at the U.S. on that trip.
Right.
But
all right, so let's. So he's got his research. He's got a couple people help. He recruits a couple Americans to help him out, and in fact, there's one inside man guy who works for an insurance company who's like helping him out on the inside, who works in the World Trade Center, and eventually they're ready to do it. So there's like a million different little stories from their whole like actual heist from the time they kind of enter the doors through the time that they get ready to actually walk on the wire. So were there any of those that really leapt out at you as noteworthy?
yeah, I did make a note about they must have been up against some of the worst security guards in the world. Like, so I mean, like they get up there early-ish, like 6 o'clock-ish, and then like they hear a security guard coming. So and they're in both towers, one crew in each tower, and the one throws a tarp over themselves to hide, which seems like. I mean, that's what my children do when they play hide and seek, and they're 4, okay, and it doesn't work at all. I'm never fooled by the blanket, you know what I mean? And that's what they did, and apparently it worked to the security guard. Later on, there's another point where they're just walking by the security guard holding heavy equipment, two dudes, and he's like appears to be awake and doesn't say like, "Hey,
Right.
who are you and why are you up here?" Which is really the only point of his job. So yeah, they that helped their cause too. That they went up against a crack team.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to disparage the security guard industry, but any security guards out there, I'm sure you do a great job. But I have heard like multiple things about security. Well, for one thing, it was like basically a construction site at that time, so I'm sure there were people coming and going and stuff like that. But also, like in some of the writing communities I hang out in, people are like, I remember a discussion one time where people were like, "What's the best job if you want to be a writer?" And the consensus answer was security guard, because you can just go to work, write all night, and then leave in the morning. You just have to like sign your little paper that you did your rounds or whatever, and there you go. So security guard, I don't know. So I guess I'm not saying all security guards are bad in any way, but maybe it wasn't like the bottom 1% that they were dealing with. Maybe. You know,
Gotcha.
that's just my guess. And I don't remember if this was actually, again, this is where I'm fuzzy. I don't remember if this was on the final approach or one of the previous ones. But how about when they went in the elevator and like the elevator operator was just like, they're planning on like only going up to the 85th floor or something, and then the elevator guy just didn't hear what the like guard or whatever said, and he was like, "Oh yeah, take us to 104."
Yeah, that'd save them hiking up 20 some odd flights of, stairs with all the equipment and stuff like that. But yeah, that was just when so they had all their fake work orders with their equipment and all that stuff, which said the 87th floor, I think, which was the highest finished floor. In other words, it really didn't make any sense for them to go any higher than that. And then when the essentially elevator operator, which apparently we had back in the day, said, "What floor should you go to?" They said 104, and he said, "Okay," and hit the 104 button. That saved him all that work, but good fortune. The other weird thing about the heist part of it, so that there's no lighting up there essentially, and they shoot the arrow with the fishing line basically tied to it across.
Right.
And there's so many parts of about that I was like, this is totally ridiculous. So they don't. I mean, like, it's only 200 feet.
Right.
So I mean, you should be able to launch an arrow pretty far, even with fishing line attached to it. Anyway, and they shoot the arrow and he doesn't see it land or doesn't know where it goes. So his solution is to strip down buck naked and walk around until it's so he can like potentially feel the fishing line somewhere on his body.
That's like a great analogy for like just who he is as a person. Like that's his solution.
Right. Obviously, I'll just get buck naked up here on the top of the tower too, or whatever, and fumble around in the dark, hoping I touch a fishing line.
and also a great like indication of his personality is it works.
Right.
Totally
Fair enough.
Yeah, so I felt like it did get a little repetitive at times with like the guards coming up and then they have to like kind of play hide and seek with the guards or whatever. But yeah, there's a lot of good stories about that. And then I guess they anything else before they actually go out on the wire?
I don't think so. I think that's like you said, a little repetitive. They had all the guards, blah blah blah. Kept walking around in circles with the guards, and which again worked somehow.
Right. And I love Philippe's attitude during all this, where he had the one quote about like, well, if I die doing this, what a beautiful death it will be.
Yeah, I love that quote. I love that, and like that I think is the real like Philippe in a nutshell. You know what I mean? Where he's just right. that romantic about his view on life, and I mean essentially he's right. I mean we fret so much about everything we do in life and all our worries and all that stuff, and I mean in the end we all die. That's a pretty beautiful death. You're just doing this crazy artistic thing for the sake of doing it, for all the world to see, and yeah, I mean I guess if you're gonna go out, why not? That's I guess a great way to do it.
Yeah, I guess that's the difference between me and Philippe. I'd be like, oh man, what a stupid death this would be if I died. I'd be like, oh my gosh, everybody would be like, what an idiot that guy was for no reason. He just went up there and Fell off. Jeez. So one thing that struck me at this part is like even however many 40 years later how like emotional everyone was getting like talking about, especially that one dude, his French buddy. um they were getting real emotional at this part when they finally like accomplished the goal of walking across the wire. So
Sure, sure. And his girlfriend at the time speaks about it with like an incredible reverence, and yeah, they all, it was they, obviously one of the greatest moments in all their lives. That 40 years later they can still feel that way about it.
yeah.
So
That reminds me, we haven't mentioned the girlfriend yet, but got the feeling that nobody wanted the girlfriend to be there that much. Like, you know what I mean? They were like semi-polite about it, the way they were talking about her, but kind of got the feeling that she was like a little bit of a tag along. That they weren't
maybe
super
because
enthused.
they did have one little part where they're like, yeah, she kept really asking to come. We were basically like, no, but then eventually we said yes. So yeah, I suppose I didn't put a lot of thought into it, but yeah, you're right. She was totally a tag along.
Yeah, a spoiler, but at the end, the relationship doesn't last like more than a couple hours past the walk across the wires. The relationship ends
No,
pretty quickly thereafter. Right?
yeah, no, it's not a couple hours, right? They make it back to France. I
Ah,
mean,
did they? I don't know.
it didn't they like stay in a hotel room together or something, and then
That was
eventually,
well. Okay, so yeah, we could talk about that. So he talks about how after, like when he gets out of police custody and everything, there's just this woman who's like, "Are you the one who walked across the wire?" And he's like, "Yes." And she's like, "Come with me." And then he goes and has sex with her.
oh, that's see, okay, so here's my little disclaimer. So when I watched that part of the film, just prior to that is the actual scene where he walks wire,
Right.
and my son is in the room with me, and I'm like, check this out. This dude is gonna walk between the World Trade Centers, blah blah, and he's floored and totally enthralled by it that this guy is doing this, and they see the height of the building. So
I
he's
see where
watching
this
this,
story's going.
and all of a sudden, the only and this whole movie is like a totally PG movie. This is totally a documentary that I would absolutely let my son watch.
Right.
And then all of a sudden they're like, and then the hotel room, and they start showing naked people doing grown-up things. So of course I'm like, fast forward, oh shit, like freaking out. I got my son in the room, like, go, go, go. So I did miss
Right.
everything, like, as soon as they get to the hotel room until like I was comfortable pressing play again. Afterwards, I did not actually watch that part of the documentary.
All right.
My son is 7 years old, by the way, which makes
Right.
yeah,
Understandable.
yeah.
All right. So we'll get back to that great scene, but it was pretty great when he was walking across the wire and doing all kinds of stuff, and the people on the ground, at least the way they portrayed it, was that there was like tons of people on the ground who were just like looking up in amazement, and
Right. Well, I think one scene that shows that it wasn't just the hype of the film, but they had the police officer who arrested him doing a press conference with the media,
right,
and you would like in my mind I would expect something like, yeah, the perpetrator was on the wire and we apprehended him approximately 45 minutes later and took him down safely with no injuries. That's my idea of a police officer doing a press conference report on anything. And he was just like, he's even like, well, you can't call him a wire walker because what he was doing out there was like dancing. It was magical. And this dude from the Bronx, this New York cop that has nothing to do with wire walking or art. And I mean, whatever. I mean, like that was the take I got from just seeing him talk. But you could tell he was absolutely moved by what he saw and absolutely, was just like he knew he was seeing something amazing and special that no one, will probably ever see again. And that's just some completely random police officer that was there at that day. And the fact that, and that's not like his recap 40 years later. That was the footage from him the day after. So, I believe it. I believe that this whole thing was a truly magical and special thing for anyone that actually saw it.
good point. Good point.
Yeah.
I did love that police officer, and I loved the whole scene where the police are like trying to apprehend him, and he's like just
Yeah,
running back and forth on the wire, and like they don't know what to do, And then eventually they threatened to like get a helicopter to come like knock him off the wire, which I don't think they would have done that, but who knows?
Yeah, it's a good threat though.
Yeah. So then he comes in and gets arrested, and
Yeah.
and yeah, then he goes. They send him to a mental hospital for a little bit, and find out if he's to insane or not, and they determine he's not, and they let him go, and that's when he like grabs on the first groupie he could get his hands on, and like during the whole scene too, it's funny because his girlfriend's like, it was like, yeah, we didn't know what happened to Philippe, and like his friends were like, yeah, we were all looking for Philippe, and and I didn't like, I don't know if you saw this part when the one crying Frenchman Fred was like, yeah, it basically ruined our friendship. Our friendship was broken or whatever by that experience, but like it's still such a great memory to me, even though we were never friends again after that.
Why was their friendship broken by the experience?
I don't know. That's what I'm a little fuzzy on. I think like I got the sense that it was basically that like Philippe basically like right after that just ditched the rest of his team and like lived it up like a celebrity in New York City for a while, and like the rest of them like couldn't
Gotcha.
find him for a while, and like he was just taking like all the credit and living it up like a celebrity basically. Um, so I think that's what happened. But yeah, he definitely went and had sex with the first groupie he could find, and
Ah,
that was the end of his relationship with his girlfriend.
that's
Um,
hilarious because again, because the way I watched it, which was in 15 times speed, I assume that was supposed to be a reenactment of him and his girlfriend, but yeah, I
right.
totally missed that. That's much funnier now.
and and then they show like the police report. The title of the movie comes from the police report, where they on the police report it says like nature of the of disturbance or something, and then it said man on wire under the nature of
I did
disturbance.
see that. That was cool.
Yeah, and eventually they drop the charges and have him like sign one of the beams on the top of the one of the towers and all that stuff. So it's all good. And again, that article I read said that the World Trade Center people were like basically super happy that happened because everyone was like so down on them, and that was like something positive that happened there. That they were plenty happy to drop the charges against him at that point.
Yeah, the funny thing is like there's a lot of ways that I like the world better back then when we weren't so flippin' uptight. When you could be like, I mean, like obviously you don't want people just stringing wires between buildings and walking on them or whatever. I mean, that's a weird thing, but the guy did it. He didn't have any ill intentions, and it worked out good for everybody. And at the end, they were like, "All right, cool, good enough. Walk away scot free, no harm, no foul." Now we
Yeah,
would be there'd be people would be lawyered up, and you'd have to like spend 3.5 years in trial over this, and Homeland Security would be whatever charge him with all kinds of random stuff, and I think we need to get a little go back to the let's be like logical and reasonable and just like be able to shake hands over something and say no harm, no foul. But we just can't do that anymore. Everything's so you know logistic and
yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know.
I wonder how much different it really was though, because the one friend does bring that up. He's like, "Gosh, I was so scared because America is such a litigious society that I was like, if something happened to him, I knew I'd get charged with all this different stuff, and it would. Um, so I don't know. Maybe it was a lot different. Maybe that couldn't happen today. I'm not sure.
Here's a side note that I think, in my mind, kind of proves that things have changed a lot. Maybe this story might make it sound like it's changed for the better, but so I had a friend who back in, oh, geez, let's see, it would have been 26 years ago now, was driving with his girlfriend. He was driving the car, and it was in Colorado up in the mountains anyway, too, so it wasn't in the city, but and a policeman pulled him over, and he was obviously intoxicated, and his girlfriend was in the passenger seat, and he pulls him over, and he starts talking to him, and he says, and he looks at the girlfriend, and he's like, "Are you drunk?" And she said, "No, officer, I'm totally sober." He said, "Well, switch seats," and they they switched seats, and she drove home. Obviously now in the same scenario, he would spend he would get a DUI and spend some time in jail and lose his license and all that stuff. I'm not saying that you should drive drunk or whatever, but in a scenario like that, you don't when no one was hurt and you can solve an issue without ruining anyone's life. Maybe we could still do that today.
Yeah,
But,
no, the world's definitely changed on that. I remember back in the day, it used to be like, oh, just keep it between the lines as you drive home.
right. Not that I want to promote drunk driving or anything like that, but I'm just saying that we didn't have to take everything to the extreme every single time. You didn't have to involve 500 lawyers and whatever.
Right.
Just
I'm glad you
like
said
Philippe.
Yeah, I'm glad you said you don't support drunk driving, because that almost overtook when you said that you support British imperialism as the as the most controversial stance ever.
Right.
Uh, Good times, good times.
Mm.
One other note I made is I really like the score of this. They had a nice like sad piano kind of like score going through this that I liked. I don't know if you noticed the soundtrack, but
I didn't. I didn't. Now you bring it up, I'm thinking back, and yeah. But yeah, now I wish I would have paid more attention to it.
it was good times. And I also like the little quote from Philippe towards the end where he says, it might have been the very end when he talks about how he thinks life should be lived on the edge, and I don't remember the rest of the quote, but that's the main thing. The part I wrote down is that he feels like life should be lived on the edge. It's good.
Agreed. Yeah, I like Philippe. I think if there were more Philippes in the world, it would be a better place. So I can't be one of them, but I wish I could. He's a good guy.
Good old Philippe.
Yeah, good old Philippe. Cool. Any other thoughts on Man on Wire? We taking it to the
No.
end?
How many stars are you gonna give it?
I'm gonna give it. I'll start up at 4. I'm gonna give it the 4 out of 5.
Okay. I'll give it 4.5. I'm gonna tie it with Exit Through the Gift Shop that we did last week. They're very similar in my heart.
They're similar themes, although I definitely like Exit Through the Gift Shop quite a bit better. So
fair enough. All right, what do we got on deck for next week?
All right. I threw together a list of 3 basic needs, which are going to be money, food, and shelter. Are my I tried to find a documentary that kind of fit all of those.
Okay.
All right. So the first of which is called Death by China, which states, as cheap goods flood the market, America is losing manufacturing jobs fast. Is China to blame? Ooh, I don't know. I have not seen that yet, but it got somewhat decent reviews. Next is Farmageddon. I have also not seen this documentary. Delicious raw milk. This is their little caption from it. Delicious raw milk. Wholesome homegrown foods. Why are family farms all over the country being shut down? Apparently we have to watch Farmageddon to find out. And then the third one I have seen, and I actually have brought it up as a choice prior to this, but it's called Cool It. And it's, let's see, Bjorn Lambor, who's a, I think, Norwegian scientist, challenges prevailing ideas on climate change and explores scientific advances that may avert global warming crisis.
Interesting.
And yeah, I guess I won't try and sell any of them over the others. Let you make your choice.
Okay. These all seem like I'm going to have to do research in order to find out the validity of the claims of these documentaries, but that's okay. I'm intrigued by it. So do I want to do China, or do I want to do food, or do I want to do the what was the last one? There's climate change.
Yeah, environmental climate change.
All right, let's do climate change, just because I'm intrigued by what that one's all about.
Ooh, I'm glad you did. Even though the other ones could be great, like I said, I haven't seen them, but that one that was one of those documentaries that I watched and had a slightly different perspective on the world after watching it. So it was. I think it's a good choice. I'd like to see it again, so I'm glad you picked it.
Cool. All right, so we will watch Cool It next week. If you have any thoughts on it, send them to feedback@documentaryreviewpodcast.com. That's going to do it for us this time. Keep it real. I am PT.
I'm Jonathan. We'll see you next week.